I heard that you all have Senior Master Sergeant Kevin Wallace here, or had him here the other night. And so if you have not engaged that young fella, you should.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Mark, Nikki, good to have you here. First and foremost, I just want to thank the Lincoln Concord chapter of AFCEA for having me out here. It's an honor. So what I'm here to talk about today is not a happy subject, so I do thank you genuinely for being here. I myself have survived suicide attempt, actually about 2 months before I went out to David's event, so I'll get to that later. But in those darkest times, so I was at a shooting range. I had a fairly new .45 revolver, putting some lead down range, and when I left there, it was just, I was at rock bottom. Pulled off. It was near Fort Belvoir in Virginia. Pulled off the side of the road, went out in the woods, and I was just gonna, I was gonna leave. So in that moment, sitting there, and I must have been in those woods for a good couple hours, I came to the realization on my own that the pain may leave for me, but it's going to be amplified, right? And what I mean is it's going to be, the pain I'm feeling was very significant, but now I'm going to amplify that fracture, and I'm going to put it on my children, I'm going to put it on my wife, I'm going to put it on, I already knew David and those guys then, so all my friends. I was at the 89th Airlift Wing at Andrews at the time. I'm going to put it on my unit. I had a wing commander advocating for me. He knew I wasn't well. I'm going to put it on him personally. Maybe he's going to feel like he could have done more. And I'm going to put it on anyone out there who loves me. So on my own, I came to that conclusion that I'm not going to. I may solve my own problems, but I'm just going to create problems for a lot of other people. So I went to the emergency room, checked myself in, spent some time inpatient, spent a lot of time outpatient, and I'm glad I'm here to talk to you guys about this. So around the same time I mentioned, this is really how I saw myself. I thought, if I was going to go out and find a job, I was still active duty then, how could I do that? And towards the end of my career, like everyone, I was going through a med board, I was going to be medically retired, so you go through these transition assistance workshops, right? And I had to write a resume. I hadn't written one, so I enlisted, at a young age and spent 20 years, 4 months, 12 days doing that. So, job seeking wasn't something I had much experience outside of fast food and teenage type jobs. So I really struggled with finding good things to say about myself, because this is truly how I saw myself back then. I like to say that darkness comes from darkness, and that's true. I'll get into some other things later. Fortunately, I never suffered sexual abuse or significant physical abuse as a child or anything like that, but trauma can come from any number of things. For me, it was a continual exposure to very negative and evil things in the world. And it wasn't all bad. I refused to acknowledge I had PTSD because I enjoyed combat. So I would talk to all these mental health professionals, and they asked all the same questions. When I'm driving down the road, am I, checking the sides of the road? No. When you hear fireworks, are your anxiety pinging? Your suds up? Are you hitting the deck? No, they don't bother me. Because for me, I enjoyed that. And I know it sounds strange, but you can see my stature. I'm not a big guy. I've never been a big guy. So the RPG that David mentioned and, IED and some other things haven't shortened me. I've always been like this. But when I attached as an Air Force guy to some of these infantry units and these, Ranger units and ODAs and MARSOC, and some of what I saw as the toughest guys on the planet, and I knew they would have my back. There was no doubt about that. But when I proved in really harsh situations that I could have their back, that meant everything to me. It validated maybe a lot of deep deep second guessing I had of myself throughout life. So I actually enjoyed the landscape of Afghanistan. I enjoyed working along our ground brothers and sisters, and I enjoyed those sorts of things. But on the peripherals of any firefight, and I have been through some significant firefights, like Dave mentioned. That one particular one, there was 12 of us fighting off a Taliban force of about 140 for 3 days, all dismount, couldn't get resupply drops or anything. So, and we were, of the 12 of us, 7 were wounded very early on. So it was a struggle, but what really messed me up was this. I am diagnosed with PTSD, but for me, I think it's more of a moral injury. It's when, honestly, it's the things I failed to do. It's when I was part of a team mentoring the Afghan National Police, and I go into a checkpoint, and they have a little boy tied up to, a desk, a little 4-leg table thing. And this little boy, wrong tribe, maybe father had a debt, any number of reasons. They have a word, bachabazi is what they call these kids, and they'll serve chai, they'll do chores, and they're there for the occasional raping pleasure of these very sick men. So I made contact with this kid, with this kid, carried on, did my job, we left, but his eyes, like the help in his eyes, are burnt into my psyche. I see it, almost every night when I lay in bed. So me failing to act, failing to help this kid, I think jeopardized everything I know is right. And that's one example, and I have several examples of just very ugly, atrocious things. I don't want to sit here and antagonize you guys with these stories of evil. But just understand that there are some very oppressive, evil, brutal regimes out there, and they're doing horrible things. And my inability, I justified that I didn't have the legal authority, which is the truth, but still as a human being, that's hard for me to live with. So I carry that and made it difficult for me to raise my own kids. And you could read what's on there, but I'm in school now, so I went from a high school graduate to now I'm working on my PhD. I think I'm gunning for things I've always wanted in life. But part of being in school is opening myself up to a lot of young people who are trying to explore new ideas and explore the world, and it's all good. Sometimes I just get rubbed in the wrong way when they don't understand, the baggage I bring to the conversation, and nor should they understand. But what I really want to say in this slide is while I wholeheartedly believe we were over there ridding the world of monsters, somehow I was slowly becoming a monster myself, and I brought that monster into my own living room and exposed my kids and wife to that monster. So that is what drove me personally to suicide, but that's Kevin's story. We have a bigger problem in the Air Force, and in fact the DoD, with suicide. It's plaguing our active duty force, our Guard, our reserves, our veteran community has been plagued by it for years. So I think as people, as human beings, compassionate people, we need to take this head on and find a way to do something, because something is tragically wrong. I lost a good friend earlier this year. He's a Marine Corps major. He was the epitome of resiliency. Like if they were to make a poster of this guy, that would be him. Young officer, infantry officer, went force recon, went Anglico for a brief period of time, came into MARSOC when it stood up. They don't make like tougher guys than Major Sean Miller. Earlier this year, in 19, he killed himself, and we laid him to rest in Arlington in September of last year. And those things, and we surely all of us know someone in this room who's done that, and it's got to stop. So that's why I'm here talking to you today. And I mentioned that's Kevin's story because the truth is a very, 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 very small number of Americans have seen combat directly. It's an extreme situation, but I mean, you could be watching a marathon and something happens. Or any of these other number of statistics up here. And I think as people, we don't want to look at the ugliness. So we tend to, ignore the fact that 1 in 7 female soldiers was sexually abused as a child. I don't know the psyche of what's driving that. And by soldiers, I mean service members. I just use soldier as military members in these slideshows. But there's 6.6 million US child abuse cases annually. There's a lot of harm going on out there, and those people become part of our family. And we may not understand why they're not themselves at work, or why they, maybe they're abrupt in the way they talk, or they're standoffish at the party, or they don't want to come down to the bar and have drinks with you. And I think we need to take it upon ourselves to understand that, to learn them, to love them, definitely not violate them. So I really see, and it's really interesting that David mentioned it because we didn't talk about this, but I really see these as 4 definitive ways to combat this epidemic. Self-awareness. Now that's hard. Self-awareness is hard because I know I was sick for a long time. Then I didn't know I was sick. And if I did know, I thought I'm going to get through this on my own without mental health, without jeopardizing my career. So you really have to know yourself first and foremost. And then once you know yourself, you have to take care of yourself. You have to be connected. You have to want to belong, and you have to enable other people to belong. And then, lastly, care of others. But when you're in such a dark place that you're barely caring for yourself, it's hard to fathom caring for others, but it all works into the equation, and I'll get to it. So self-awareness. I talked about that I was that monster at home. I really was. I was emotionally and verbally abusive to my entire family. Not physically, definitely not sexually, but I was emotionally and verbally abusive, and there's no other word I can substitute with. I was dark, I was mean, I was an asshole. Every day I would tell myself when I left work, like, not today, whatever happens, not today, and I would listen to the soothing music as I drove home, but sure enough, something would set me off. And I was dark, and I should have seen that in myself. I shouldn't have continued to be that person at home, but I didn't see it in myself then until it was almost too late, until I almost killed myself, because I saw that as the only way to change, the only way to help those I love, which, going back to what I said about it amplifying and fracturing and being put on them, that's not helping them at all. Torment them for 3 years and then, then leave it all on their shoulders. So now we're going through a path of healing together. My daughters are in college, my son's graduating high school, a lot of healing going on in my house. And I don't want to go too deep down this path, but for us, religion, faith is a part of that. And I hope you have something like that too, or just something that drives you. And I'll continue to talk about that in the next slide. Self-care. There's 2 things I'm really passionate about in life. One is the environment, particularly the coral reefs and the waterways. Spending most of my life in California, growing up surfing, just in the water. I feel most comfortable in the water. And the oceans are in a really bad situation. So any chance I have, which, it's expensive, so right now I can't really afford to do this, but if I could, I would be under the water, I would be cleaning coral reefs and this sort of thing because I'm passionate about it. The other thing is art, like David mentioned, and that's much more manageable financially. So you have to find in yourself what you're passionate about and then do it if you can. And don't feel bad about it. If that's taking time away from your family or your unit, if you're wasting some of your leave to go do these things, it's still very important. Self-care is vitally important because you can't be the best you unless you're taking care of you, right? Then being connected and belonging, you have to find your tribe. And I didn't get the last part of this until I started working with ground units. And they give you so much crud, particularly when you're Air Force, but that's out of love, right? So if you find those people who love you, for you, and despite you being you, they accept all your flaws and they still love you, that's a good group of people. Connect to those people. This is a photo from one of David's The Blue Skies for Good Guys and Gals Warrior Weekend to Remember. Actually, this is from last year. But all 4 of these people I'll be connected to for life. Everyone I've ever met there I'll be connected to for life. And then down here on the other side, this is a group of veterans that I was, once again, the only Air Force, a bunch of soldiers and Marines that we went down and cleaned this coral reef together, and little came in. But so much healing happened when you've got mission-focused people. You have a new mission and you have purpose, and every single person, much like in David's organization, is combat wounded and has, most of them had pretty severe emotional problems. And so much healing happens when you're doing good for the environment. So these are my passions, and these are where I belong, but it's imperative that you also find where you belong. And don't judge people for not understanding, because even in my darkest hours, I had a tribe at St. John's Lutheran Church, and I love those people and they loved me, but those kind of things I couldn't talk about there. You need to find people who have familiar experiences to yours, I think is really important in this process as well. And finally, the care of others. Like I said, that's kind of hard to fathom when you're struggling to take care of yourself, but caring for others is also self-serving in that it feels really good to be able to help someone out. What I'm doing in that photo and what I'm doing right here, this takes so much out of me. Like, I stirred in bed, barely slept last night, had to have, I think, 3 beers before I even went to bed. Trust me, I'm going to be having a rum when I'm done with this. It physically takes a lot out of me. I feel like I've run a marathon. And what you're thinking is self-medicating. Well, that's true, but bet you'll see me at the bar. Because it does take a lot out of me, but there's also something tremendously powerful if you can connect with one person and you can inspire that one person to come out of their dark place and get help. Because as a community of people, we can stop this suicide epidemic. We can save lives. We just need to rally around these 4 principles, or whatever you find that works, and make sure we commit to not another one. So just going back to earlier slide, reminding you of what I thought about myself 4 years ago, because this is the person I always was. With the exception of the grad student there, everything else on that list, I was already that person. I've been that person my whole career. I just lost that. I lost focus. I forgot that I was that person. I was in such a dark place I couldn't see that. So David and those people, those Purple Heart recipients and Gold Star families, I think helped remind me when a Gold Star wife who's going through a really hard time after losing her husband wants to know stories of combat that are similar to what her TACP, her JTAC husband was involved in. And by the way, I knew the guy. There's a lot of power in that. And through that darkness, you can start rediscovering yourself. I do want to harken back quickly that this isn't just a combat thing. It sounds like that's what I'm talking a lot about, but like I said, I've never experienced some of those other forms of abuse myself. So for me, combat very much is the root of my darkness. But if someone in here is struggling with something, it's just as significant. Trauma doesn't have, measuring sticks or anything of that nature. Whatever you're going through is important, and you need to find the people that are your tribe, and you need to take care of yourself, and you need to know yourself enough to know that you're in a dark place. Because with that, if we create a culture of that, and a tribe and a family that revolves around that, we can really tackle this thing. I know the Air Force specifically, General Goldfein and Chief Wright have put a lot of resources and a lot of thought into this suicide epidemic among the active duty, Guard, and veteran, and reserve community. the veteran community seems to fall by the wayside. I don't really know who's focused on them other than some nonprofits, but we are losing now currently 20.6 veterans a day to suicide, and that's unacceptable. So once again, this is me. I do want to thank you for spending a half hour with us today. I didn't want to take a lot of your afternoon. I just think it's a subject too important to not be said. I know we're here for business and to learn from the panels, and I want you to enjoy your week and go on networking and doing all the things you should be doing here. But somewhere in your mind, go back to your unit, and if you see someone that's just not right, reach out. Or if you're just not right, seek help. And feel free anytime this conference to come see me over there or pull me aside and talk to me. That's happened in the past, and I probably know some people that I can connect you with, people like David. And thank you for your time, and hope you enjoyed this.
You want to take any questions, guys?
I would love to take questions.
I heard that you all have Senior Master Sergeant Kevin Wallace here, or had him here the other night. And so if you have not engaged that young fella, you should. And you should have him at anything and everything that you can, because him and those like him that have experienced the challenges of the employment of our national security in such a way like he did, we need to have that story told. We need to have that story told in a super huge way. There are people each and every day in this nation, in our armed forces, that are in harm's way, and sometimes it seems as if it's marginalized. The challenges that Senior Master Sergeant Kevin Wallace experiences on a daily basis, and others, maybe someone sitting next to you, is tremendous. I'm glad that he is taking his opportunity and his time to speak about post-traumatic stress, drop the D. Anytime that you are placed in an unusual and abnormal situation, I don't know that we need to call it a disorder. Is that all right?